Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Magic Duels. This week's subscriber deck is an Is It Burn Pyromancers Assault kind of deck. It was submitted by Richard W. Without further ado though, let's get into the deck, shall we? I did make one or two changes to the final build, just slightly to make it deal with creatures a little better. So we have stuff like Lightning Axes. But let's look at the key cards in the deck. So the main way that we're trying to win is by using Pyromancer's Assault. So it's a 4 mana with 1 red. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, Pyromancer's Assault deals 2 damage to target creature or player. So this is essentially how we want to win the game. We want to storm off, essentially. So we've got plenty of ways of filling our hands. We've got plenty of ways of punishing our opponent for having a good hand. Plenty of ways of drawing, and lots of cheap spells and burn. So let's go down to the beginning and let's have a look at what we've got. So we've got 2 Fall of the Titans. So it's 2x and a red instant. We can Fall of the Titans deals X damage to each of up to 2 target creatures and or players. So we can point one at a creature and one at a player. We can point both at 2 creatures, or we can just do similar. If we cast a spell before this one though, we can use its surge cost, which we always want to aim to use its surge cost, because without it, it costs 2 for every 1 damage you want to do, and you really don't want to use it like that. We can also use it for 0 as well. If we want to surge something else, we could even, for example, cast this one for 0, and then surge the next Fall of the Titans for the actual damage. So it would be that 2 red and an X in that kind of sense for 2 cards. So we can actually do a lot of damage with this card. It's pretty much our game winner. There's plenty of ways to do more damage with it. So for example, Geist Blast, we can exile it and double it. So if we, for example, manage to get X to 5, we could copy that and deal 10 damage with the Fall of the Titans, which is awesome, because we don't have to repay the X when we copy it. The X is set in stone when the copy comes out. Next we have Lightning Axe. This is one of the additions I made to deal with bigger creatures, because I found a lot in playtesting. You can take care of aggressive decks with our small burn spells, but if they manage to get out a big creature, there's not a great deal we could do. So Lightning Axe is a 1 mana 5 damage burn spell. You can either pay for 6 or you can discard a card. So we added in a discard a profitable discard in the form of Fiery Temper. So we could discard a card, deal 5 damage to a creature. The card would be Fiery Temper, deal 3 damage to a player or another creature, and we get lots of value through that way. So it's pretty good for that. It's the main way of getting rid of big creatures, but we don't want to focus too much on cards that don't target players, which is why it's only a 2 of. And we also don't have many profitable discards as well, so I thought to keep it a little low down in that regard. Clutch of Currents, it's a 1 mana blue spell. Return target creature to its owner's hand. Simple enough. We can also awaken 3 for 5, so this might be an alternate win con if it's not going well for us. This is a way to get rid of big creatures, push stuff out the way, but also to get the trigger through cheap spells. So we can actually use it to get counters off for just 1 mana. It's 1 mana, remove a counter kind of thing. So it's really good in that regard, and it can push through a little bit of extra damage if we've got the Awoken Horror in and stuff like that. Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, 2 mana 0/2, can draw a card, then discard a card, and if there's 5 or more cards in the graveyard, which is very likely because we're going to be casting a lot, exile it and return him to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. So he comes in transformed. This is why we want him in here. Also because we can loot lands out to get more instants and sorceries into our hand as well. So we can get more action by getting rid of the bad cards. So he starts at 5 loyalty, and for +1, up to 1 target creature gets -2 mana so until the end of the turn. So we can use this to slow down our opponent, because we don't want to point all the spells at our opponent's creatures, but we do want to point 1 or 2 there. So this is for when we don't want to necessarily kill one of his creatures with the spells in our hand. We might want to point them at him instead. -3, you can give any instant or sorcery flashback, which means you can cast any card in your graveyard, any instant or sorcery that is, from your graveyard, and then it gets exiled. Unfortunately, this is currently bugged. I think it's fixed in the next update, but we're going to pretend that it works. So if I do exile a card from the graveyard, I am going to pretend that it is no longer there for all intents and purposes. It will still sort of be cheating because it'll still count towards spell mastery and stuff like that, but I don't think that actually really matters too much. Yeah, it only matters for Exquisite Firecraft, so we should be alright in that regard. There's only so much I can do to not cheat when the game's bugged in that kind of manner. And then his ultimate we don't really ever want to use. It's really for mill decks in a nutshell, so it's there if you want to use it, but very unlikely. So, Thing in the Ice, 2 mana, 0/4 defender. It comes into play with 4 counters on, and when you cast an instant or sorcery, you may remove an ice counter from it, and if it has none, transform it into a Woken Horror. So, 4 turns after Thing in the Ice, we could potentially have a 7/8 that bounces every single creature our opponent controls, as long as it's not a horror. I think this card gets a bit of a debuff in the new set, because there's a lot of horror cards coming in, actually, now that I think about it. So we might see Thing in the Ice not be played as much. Just occurred to me then. But yeah, we can use him to mass burn out and maybe... mass bounce, sorry, and then maybe get the 7 damage in, which, with the amount of burn spells we've been throwing, might be the game just off that alone. Telling Time, 2 mana. For an instant, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, one on top of your library, and one on the bottom of your library. So this is to mana fix us, this is to get our cheap creatures. It's also a cheap card that we can use for the Pyromancers Assault triggers. It's that kind of stuff. Nice card, sets us up in the future, and we can cast it whenever we want. Twin Bolt, 2 mana, deal 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 target creatures or players. So if they're playing White Weenie, we can target 2 1 toughness creatures. Really good for White Weenie is this deck, because we have a lot of burn spells to deal with their creatures, and they'll lose steam quite fast. But it kind of relies on us having a good burn opening hand, which is quite likely. We do have a lot of burn spells. The few of the changes that I did make were to make it more burny, as you can see. Not Bernie Sanders, though. Right, 3 mana, Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. Whenever you cast a red spell, untap Chandra, and you can also tap her to deal 1 damage to a player, and if she's dealt 3 or more damage, exile her, return her to the battlefield under your control. So, great burn spell. We've got plenty of red spells to trigger it as well. We could Surge for 0, and then Geist Blast and all this lot. So it's quite easy to flip Chandra. She can also flip herself as well, so we can attack him for 2, play a red spell which untaps her, and then use her own triggered ability to do the 3rd damage that way. So when she flips, we get Chandra Roaring Flame for loyalty. +1 deals 2 damage to target player. We'll be using this a lot. -2, we can deal 2 damage to a creature. Might end up using this a fair bit. If we can ultimate her though, it's very likely that we end up winning. So Chandra deals 6 damage to each opponent. Each player dealt damage this way gets the emblem. At the beginning of your upkeep, this deals 3 damage to you. So it's guaranteed 3 damage every single turn off of her ultimate after the 6 damage is done. So once we ultimate, it's 6. On their turn, it's 9. And then if they're not at 9 by the time you've ultimated Chandra, there's something wrong with the way you've played, and you very much likely don't deserve to win, but you probably will off the ultimate anyway. Jorian, Ruin Diver. So 1 blue and a red for a 2/3 legendary creature. When you cast your 2nd spell each turn, draw a card. So this is a great way to keep our hand filled. The problem with this deck can sometimes be that you splurge out all your cards real early. And if you do that, you need a way to refill your hand. So Jorian allows you to recklessly throw your cards out in order to get Pyromancer's Assault triggers, because you're going to get a card back anyway. So you're going to be triggering Pyromancer's Assault with a net loss of 1 card, essentially. And we have plenty of ways to draw cards after that, so we're likely to have our hand filled as long as we have the right amount of draw cards and abilities. Speaking of, for the same mana cost, it's an enchantment, Fevered Visions. At the beginning of each player's end step, that player draws a card. If the player is your opponent and has 4 or more cards in hand after he draws, Fevered Visions deals 2 damage to him or her. So this is a absolute game winner in its own right. So against really late game and high converted mana cost decks, your opponent won't be able to empty their hand, so this will actually be doing 2 damage per turn to them. It will be filling their hand up, but we need our hand filled up as well, which is where the other benefit comes in. So it's not too bad that they're filling their hand up, because they're taking 2 damage, and it keeps us getting all of our telling times and twin bolts and stuff like that. Keeps the storm going, essentially, and stops us running out of steam. We could get unlucky and get lands, but that's just magic for you. 3 mana, Geist Blast, instant. So Geist Blast deals 2 damage to target creature or player. And you can also pay 2 and a blue to exile it from your graveyard and target instant or sorcery spell you control and choose new targets. So we could, for example, Fiery Temper, Geist Blast, that's 6 damage. We could Exquisite Firecraft, that's 8 damage that's uncounterable, very likely. We could do Fall of the Titans, X5 to Infinite, and copy that, and, you know, deal a lot of damage that way. Also does 2 damage to target creature or player, so it's a burn spell by itself, and we can get it into the graveyard just by using it, and then use its ability after that, so it's awesome. Love it. Fiery Temper for 1 and 2 red. It's an instant that deals 3 damage to target creature or player, and it has Madness for 1, so it has the ability essentially to turn it into a lightning bolt. So for 1 mana you could do 3 damage to target creature or player. We have a fair few ways of discarding it. Either by the Jace or the lightning bolt is pretty much the way to go. I'm not sure if there's any other ways that we've got other than filling our hand up so much that we're forced to discard it, which isn't out of the question. Because we have a lot of ways of drawing cards and a lot of ways of making our hand stay the same size. And in the late game, it's not too bad to pay the 3 mana. That's why it's a 3 of. Not a 4 of as well, because as I said, it's kind of high on the curve when it comes to burn spells for us in this deck specifically, so that's why it's not a 4 of. Maybe try it out if you want to go more of a Madness build in this sort of style. Radiant Flames. So we can't quite get Radiant Flames to full power, but we can get it pretty close. So for 3 mana, it has Converge. Radiant Flames deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of colours spent to cast it. We can get this to 2. I considered throwing a single different coloured mana in, but I thought it probably hurts us more than helps us if we wanted to try and get Radiant Flames to 3. It's also not too bad as well, because a lot of our creatures are 3 toughness and higher in the thing in the ice. The ones that we want to stick around anyway are 3 toughness and higher. So, you know, it's not too bad that we can't get the 3 damage, and still against White Weenie and stuff like that, it's a board wipe. Against tokens, it's a board wipe, you know. So Radiant Flame still has a nice place in the deck for us, though it's not as powerful as it could be. Exquisite Firecraft. So for 1 and 2 red, it's a sorcery that deals 4 damage to target creature or player, and if you have Spell Mastery, which is if your graveyard's full of instants or sorceries, then it cannot be countered. So this is our game winner. If our opponent's down at 4 or less life, we play this. There is nothing they can do short of gaining life in response. We can also copy it with Geist Blast and deal extra damage. You know, if you're playing a burn deck, Firecraft has to be in there. It's just an auto include. Pyromancers Assault. We've spoken about this. When you cast 2 spells, you get to do 2 damage to target creature or player. Can target Planeswalkers as well, so it's awesome. Comparative Analysis. So this is our form of card draw. We can make it cheaper. So for Surge, which is how we want to cast it most of all, so that'd be 2 and a blue, we get to draw 2 cards at instant speed, which is great. We have plenty of 1 mana spells as well that we can cast, which would make it pseudo 4 mana, but we get an extra benefit out of it by doing the Surge cost. So Jace, Unraveler of Secrets, 3 and 2 blue, comes in with 5 loyalty, allows us to scry 1 and then draw a card, sets up our draws, makes sure that we get the right cards at the right times, also allows us to bounce creatures away. This is quite important because this deck can struggle kind of against creature based decks, especially ones with high toughness anyway, so ramp decks and stuff like that. This will help us bounce away their creatures. And then if we manage to ultimate our Jace, which isn't out of the question, because we probably want to be scrying most of all with the Jace, So for -8, you get an emblem with whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, counter that spell. This is just, it's brutal, it's leg breaking for our opponent. So they essentially have the counter version of our deck. They have to cast 2 spells to cast 1, whereas we cast 2 for a bonus. So it's pretty much game ending in a nutshell, but I'd imagine if you're ultimating Jace at that point, it's game ending anyway. Every single time I've seen Jace ultimate, the game's pretty much over. But that's him for you. Chandra Flamecaller, 6 mana with 2 red. So she comes in with 4 loyalty. There's many ways we can play with Chandra, or Chantel. I'm calling her Chantel from now on, don't judge. So +1, we can make her make 2 3/1 red elemental tokens with haste to attack in. So for +1, we can attack in for 6, which we might have been burning away other creatures as well. So this might just be a 6 mana burn spell in a nutshell. And it's awesome. They do get exiled at the end step, so they don't protect Chandra. The way that we do protect Chandra, or the way she protects herself anyway, is by her -X ability. So Chandra deals X damage to each creature. So we could -4 Chandra to do 4 damage to the board. It's not out of the question. The problem with Chandra is if it was in a professional standard, most people end up -4ing Chandra straight off the bat without much problem. With us, though, we have Mythic, so there's no way to get her back. So we're very reluctant to do the -4 straight away from casting. So we're not likely to do that. -3 maybe, but... so she could be a Radiant Flames for 6, in a nutshell. And then she sticks around and does her work. And also she has a 0 loyalty one. Discard all the cards in your hand, then discard that many cards +1. So if we're low on cards for some ungodly reason, or if our hand's filled with lands, then we can throw them all away, redraw, and maybe get a better hand. Probably get a better hand. There's not much reason to do it otherwise. And it's technically card draw as well, because you get an extra card from it. So if we are at 0 cards, we can 0 Chandra and draw a card, in a nutshell. So that's the deck essentially. Onto the lands. We've got 7 islands and 10 mountains. As you can see, our red is skewed more in that manner, in that ballpark. So we do have a lot of early game stuff. So it's maybe a good idea to maybe make this an 8 and a 9. But I think this has been working out for me just fine. So it's alright. We do have plenty of dual lands though. Speaking of, we have 2 Wandering Fumarole. So it enters the battlefield tapped. It's a red-blue land, but it also has pay 4. It becomes a 1/4, and you can pay 0 to switch its power and toughness until the end of the turn. So you can threaten your opponent with 4 damage, and if they don't block it, then you can flip it. If they do block it, then you can choose whether or not you want to flip it, and you can do this as many times as you want. So if you flip it in response, they try to burn it, you can flip it back, and therefore it doesn't die, that kind of thing. So it's a really good card for getting out that final bit of damage, especially if your hand's empty, then you've still got something to do because you've got a evasive creature on the board, in a nutshell. 2 Sulphur Falls. Sulphur Falls enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island or a mountain. Very likely because we play a lot of basics. Speaks for itself. It's an untapped dual land nearly all the time. And then we've got 2 Highland Lakes. We do want to have our mana fixed quite well. We don't want to throw in Evolving Wilds or anything like that, so I thought dual lands is a pretty good way to go. It does come in tapped, which is a bit of a downside, but turn 1 maybe, throw this down, it's alright. Later in the game though, maybe not. But if you don't like it, then there's plenty of ways to discard it away with lightning axes and stuff like that to find a better land or find a better card. Well anyway guys, that's going to do it for the deck. If you enjoyed the look of it, then be sure to check out the matches that should be following shortly after this, or if not already there. If you've enjoyed the content, then be sure to leave a like. If you've loved the content, then be sure to subscribe. But if you're not quite sure, stay for the end card, see the rest of the content we've got to offer. As always, I'll see you next time. Bye bye.